Winston Churchill once said, "Better jaw-jaw than war-war. Better to talk than to fight." The Big-ish Three, China, Japan and South Korea, are meeting to discuss regional issues. Can they agree on a seating plan, though? Is this substantively significant, or is it just another occasion for a photo opportunity? Join me, Jan Darash, for How We Got Here.
The leaders of South Korea and Japan convene with China's Prime Minister. This trilateral meeting, the first in 4.5 years, aim to restore and boost economic cooperation with China, their primary trading partner.
We should swiftly resume the Korea-Japan-China Free Trade Agreement negotiations, which have been suspended since 2019, to upgrade the foundation of economic cooperation.
The effort to strengthen economic ties comes after years of strained relations, particularly between Japan and South Korea. Historical grievances and territorial disputes have often overshadowed economic cooperation. However, the imperative of economic stability and growth appears to have motivated a renewed commitment to partnership.
Today's summit is an important opportunity for our three countries to definitely reinvigorate the dialogue.
As the global economic and strategic focus increasingly shifts towards Asia, the region stands at a crucial juncture, balancing between significant opportunities and potential conflicts. Asia has emerged as the central arena for strategic competition among major powers, featuring multiple flashpoints such as Taiwan, the South China Sea, the Korean Peninsula, and the China-India border. The primary challenge for Asia is to maintain peace and prosperity amidst its geopolitical fragility and complexity. Historically, economic development driven by a hegemonic power has fostered peace and prosperity in the Asia-Pacific. This approach, known as hegemonic stability, emphasizes economic interdependence to promote regional integration and pragmatic strategic interactions. The concept of hegemonic stability in Asia is evolving. While Chinese dynasties in the United States once dominated the region, setting the rules, now every Asian nation plays a crucial role in shaping the future.
I'm delighted to welcome our guest today, Jason Warledge. He's the Programme Director of the International Republican Institute based here in Warsaw. Welcome to the programme.
Thank you for having me.
We'll start off with this tripartite, the big three, the big-ish three, the medium three, I don't know how you'd call them, China, South Korea and Japan. What's that all about?
Well, it's certainly three important members of the global economy are getting together. And this isn't a new format. This is a series of meetings that began in 2008 and continued until COVID hit in 2019. And so this is a recontinuation of a previous format in which these three very interconnected economies were sitting down and primarily speaking about economy and trade. But the world has changed a lot since 2019, not only because of COVID, but Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the increased aggressive positioning that the People's Republic of China have taken in the South China Sea, whether we're talking about territorial disputes with the Philippines and with Japan, or the recent essential blockade of Taiwan's airspace and naval space.
Is the picture that emerges one of a kind of decadent West against an aggressive China in this discussion? How has it changed from these meetings that it had before the COVID, before this renewed aggressive posture by China? How does Japan and South Korea react?
Well, I think it's good to look at how the PRC frames this, and they've said that China and Japan, Republic of Korea and Japan are at a convection point in which they must make a decision now. Are they going to slide back into a competition of blocs vis-a-vis cooperation with the United States, or are they going to join together and develop this common future? What they've also said in the same message, and this is more or less right out from the readout of the meeting that they had in advance of this gathering. What they also said is that historical disputes and territorial claims need to be put off to the side, and that this is not the place in which they want to talk. For China, it's all about the economy, it's all about trade, and it's all about expanding cultural exchanges between the three countries.
But there are territorial disputes, aren't there? Taiwan, the North-South Korea divide, to name but two.
And there's also security concerns. Japan and Republic of Korea have not sat by over the past years idly watching how Beijing is building up. Prime Minister Kishida said in his remarks that he was deeply concerned about the eroding situation of Hong Kong and democracy and the mock trials that are happening there. He also brought up the plight of the Uyghurs and the forced labor that penetrates our supply chains. And they've also discussed, obviously, the blockade of Taiwan and these aggressive actions that we've seen from China's gray space military Coast Guard fleet.
You've mentioned that the three major or three very important economies. What about the other actors in the region? Russia, for example, with its territorial disputes with Japan, perhaps India down in the southeast, Australia. Do these countries get a look into this this grouping?
Well, I mean,
do they have their own little?
It absolutely has an impact. I mean, you can't sit down if you're the Republic of Korea or Japan. You can't sit down with China and treat them, as a legitimate actor in this case. They're openly conducting military cooperation in the forms of exercises in the Pacific Ocean around territorial waters of Japan and Korea. While these meetings are happening, North Korea has launched a new spy satellite, which has always been cover for its intercontinental ballistic missile program. While these meetings are taking place, now these things don't happen without at least the tacit approval of Beijing. They're watching Beijing increase its supplies of non-lethal aid to Russia, which the Russians are very quickly turning it into lethal aid. We can deconstruct a missile into many parts and ship it across the border, but ultimately it's still a missile that's used against civilian targets in Ukraine.
Moving now on to the European angle, what is the place of the EU in the Pacific?
Well, they first need to find it on the map. A lot of countries, I think, struggle to clearly define how they engage with this broader Indo-Pacific region. And I know a lot of people have, problems with the terminology Indo-Pacific, but, even here in Poland, there has been... However we want to talk about it, but even here in Poland, we see a disengagement from this region at a time in which Europe needs to be more engaged. And this is for a multitude of reasons. Certainly, and first most, I think Europe needs to play a strong voice, telling China that aggressive actions toward Taiwan will not be tolerated. This is in everyone's interest. The global economy will lose, in the realm of $15 to $20 trillion should there be any sort of blockade or military action against Taiwan. So this is in absolutely everyone's interest. And then as our companies here in Europe and the United States and globally are looking to realign supply chains, there's a lot of economies, there's a lot of democracies in this Indo-Pacific region that I think offer a lot of great business opportunities. And then the third thing is we need to begin here in Europe identifying, readdressing how we classify critical infrastructure and ensuring that if there was another pandemic, if there is a larger conflict that disrupts global supply chains, that Europe is protected in the basics that we need, such as pharmaceuticals.
I mean, has this been a historic mistake or historic miscalculation when Asia took over manufacturing in the 1980s and 1990s?
I believe so, yes. I mean, I think the end of history brought around a number of historical mistakes, this being one of them. Our broad deindustrialization policy in the West in exchange for, profit, essentially. Yes. This is a tremendous mistake, and it's not something that can be repaired and fixed in 1 or 2 years or even one election cycle. We're talking about policies that are going to take 5 or 10 years before we could sit there and say that our economies are safeguarded from these type of authoritarian actors.
I mean, it's fair enough for Europeans to regard the Second World War, for example, as a European-centered crisis. You can make the case for that. But in terms of scale, it was the Pacific which was the major theatre, gigantic area, gigantic empires involved in that. Is that something that Europe tends not to be aware of, for example?
I think the interesting thing that Europe tends not to be aware of, or at least consciously recognize, is the fact that there's only been one power in the world that has safeguarded supply chains from Asia to Europe over the past, 80 years. Since the, let's say, the end of the Second World War, or even during the Second World War when the United States Navy asserted its control over the Malacca Strait. Since then, there's only been one blue water navy that has been able to safeguard, these supply chains. And, this is what has fueled the global economy. And I think it's really important for everyone to recognize that, there's a second blue water navy that also wants to secure these supply chains, and that's China. And we do have to ask, are they going to supply, or are they going to protect these choke points for trade in the same way the United States has? And as a reminder for our listeners, audience today, the United States has never threatened its Western powers by saying we're going to cut off supplies to critical elements that your economy needs. However, the PRC has and does so on a regular basis. It's one of their favorite tools to use.
You mentioned the Blue Water Navy. Traditionally, having control of the sea lanes is one of the strategic dominant themes in strategic thinking, certainly in the United States. And there seems to be a naval race that's comparable to the European naval race in terms of the ships that are being built. Pre-1914, it was the dreadnoughts, the battleships. Now it seems to be aircraft carriers. China's building its third. India's building one. Japan is building kind of a secret aircraft carriers disguised as a helicopter ship. United States, obviously, we know that it's got these aircraft carriers. What impact is that going to have on the blue water theatre?
Well, it's certainly going to have an impact. China will now have force projection capabilities. And part of its global strategy, whether it's BRI or its engagement in the global south, has to establish ports of call for those ships so that now you would be able to send an aircraft carrier group in the same way that the United Kingdom, France, the US is able to do on a tour all the way around the world. And some of these ports of call would also include Piraeus in Greece, right, and inside the European Union. And so, I mean, I'm not a naval strategist. I'm not an expert on PLA naval shipbuilding capabilities. But everything we read is that they're producing ships at a speed in which the West collectively cannot help to match. There's a lot of questions about quality, and there's a larger question about how is the PLA, the military of the People's Republic of China, how is it actually going to be able to respond to a conflict? Because when the bullets start flying, the experience does really matter, and there are very few militaries in the world that I think have that type of experience, and across, from the command level down to the troops and soldiers on the ground.
China has recently conducted these so-called punishment exercises around Taiwanese waters. It needs to break out of this chain of islands on its coast. What are the effects of these things on the Taiwanese society and also on Chinese thinking? Is it going to tip over one day into an invasion, do you think, or is it content just to play these kind of boa constrictor-like games with Taiwan?
Maybe another way of talking about it is slowly boiling a frog in water, and I think this is what they're trying to do, at least with the international community. When it comes to Taiwan, I've just recently returned from there, and my assessment is that it's an incredibly resilient society. And because it is very much on the front line and it is repulsing some type of attack from the PRC on a daily basis, it does have a mentality in which, I would say that the people of the island now consider themselves Taiwanese. And the last thing that they want is reunification. They do not see there being a possibility of reunification. Internationally, we see a media storm and a propaganda surge right now saying that the inauguration and any recognition of the inauguration was a violation of the One China policy. This is incorrect. It's not a violation of the One China policy.
Coming back to this tripartite summit we had today, what are the prospects of it being a regular, or to be a regular meeting yet again as it was before the COVID episode?
Well, I think
are all three parties keen on doing this?
I think that's ultimately going to depend on Beijing. I do not see the Republic of Korea nor Japan, and we've seen this in statements that have come out in advance of the meeting, backing down from their security concerns, nor their territorial disputes. And so, what we've seen historically is that the PRC doesn't like to engage in forums in which their feelings might get hurt, because the senior leader there, the chairman of the party, Xi Jinping, is very sensitive, and we have to be concerned about these things.
Jason Wooldridge, thank you very much for coming onto the program.
Thank you for having me.
We've run out of time, but thank you very much for a great discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, that's all we have time for today. So join us again next time for How We Got Here.